Today, I want to talk to you about the ethical considerations associated with the data that you use when you're doing GIS work, with a focus on questions around who's represented in your data. Most statistical and GIS methods were originally designed with the assumption that we'd capture a complete population where every individual or element is measured. For instance, this could mean data on every person in a class or an entire university. However, it's rare to have data on everyone in a city, state, or nation. Collecting data at this scale is nearly impossible. Even the census struggles to get that kind of detail. So instead, we often work with samples, aiming for representative samples where data is broken down so that you have proportional numbers of men, women, non binary people, and people of different age categories. Increasingly, though, our data are often not representative because it's incredibly hard to get that type of data. As the data becomes more opportunistic, meaning that it's drawn from sources like cell phones, online behavior, or transaction records, it's often not truly representative. There's a tendency to overlook certain groups in these data sets, which raises important questions about who's included and who's missing. Let's take this perspective to our example of bike crash data. In this module, you'll work with two types of bike crash data: official reports and data from bikemaps.org, a crowdsourced project that our team has worked on, whereas we're inviting people to map their bike crashes, near misses, and other hazards globally. Official reports tend to capture crashes where the police are called, typically incidents that involve vehicles. However, many types of crashes don't make it into these reports, especially if they don't involve cars. For example, crashes between two cyclists or cyclists hitting infrastructure without a vehicle involved are less likely to be documented. Furthermore, individuals from marginalized groups may have legitimate concerns about engaging with police. An undocumented person, for instance, may hesitate to call law enforcement due to fears about their status, regardless of the severity of the crash. Indigenous communities might also feel reluctance, shaped by a history of mistrust toward data collecting agencies and concerns over how their information might be used without their consent. These concerns are valid given the history of surveillance and mistreatment that both undocumented individuals and Indigenous people have faced when their data has been collected and used without their full understanding, consent, or control. Similarly, with bikemaps.org data, participants are often individuals who identify as dedicated cyclists, people who have the resources, time, and comfort with the technology needed to contribute to such a project. This data, too, is selective and may exclude those without internet access or those who feel uncomfortable sharing their data online. Imagine being undocumented. Would you feel comfortable contributing personal data to any platform, no matter how anonymous it claims to be? So, while both types of data provide valuable insight, we must question whose perspectives are missing. Is often those with busier lives, people who aren't tech savvy, or people who face legitimate fears about where their information might end up. Indigenous communities, in particular, have emphasized the importance of data sovereignty, their right to own, manage, and control data about their people, lands, and resources. This is a critical consideration as we evaluate the completeness and ethics of our data sets. While analyzing data, it's crucial to ask, will using this data cause more harm than good? Also, there's always a risk of a feedback loop where decisions based on incomplete data further reinforce disparities. For instance, if we only analyze data from groups who have the means to contribute, we're likely making decisions that serve that group, potentially widening the gap for others who are left out. I encourage you to think about these issues beyond just biking. Consider other data sets collected through technology. Who's represented? Who isn't? And why? Even when using something as robust as census data, it's essential to recognize potential gaps, limitations, and uncertainties. Not everyone feels secure participating. For some, like undocumented people, the very act of sharing data could feel risky. Or for others, like Indigenous communities, there may be a strong preference for data sovereignty and control over how their information is used. Ultimately, questions around who's represented and who's missing are complex. But as you work with data, it's important to approach these questions critically, keeping in mind the historical and social context that shape the different groups' comfort with data sharing.